Welcome to the Polgar Chess University. In this lesson, our topic is trapping of pieces. Let's get started with our very first example. Here we go. In this position, it is White's turn, and at the moment we can see that, materially speaking, it is Black who is ahead. Black still has his bishop, the only minor piece on the board, while White, it's true, has a majority in pawns, but only 2 extra pawns, which theoretically is not sufficient to compensate for 1 less bishop. In addition to that situation, the White rook at the moment is under attack by Black's king. So that further limits White's opportunities. In fact, it gives a hint. The rook is attacked, so most likely we need to move that rook. However, I'd like to point it out that there may be exceptions, which is not the case here. But if White would have other pieces on the board as well, like a queen or a bishop or knight or something else, there may be options when you may be able to give a check with another piece or counterattack another opponent's piece. However, getting back to this example, it's not the case here. It's pretty clear in this situation that the White rook needs to move. Generally speaking, our first ideas or goals should be, when one of our pieces is attacked, to try to move away that piece in a way that it either gives a check or attacks another important piece. With that, it's something called we're gaining a tempo. What that means is that you're not just wasting time on defense, on moving your attacked piece to a safe square, but you're combining your defense with your offense. That's called gaining time, or as the chess lingo says, gaining a tempo. In this case, giving a check would not be a good option, because either option, the Black king would just capture, as the square is neighboring two webs. So the next best thing we can do is attack Black's unprotected bishop. Of course, attacking a rook with a rook is rarely a good idea, because the enemy rook would just capture us. Well, with all those hints, it's quite easy to figure out what the correct move is, which is rook b7. The good news is, in this case, it's not only that we moved the rook away from the attack, it's not only that we attacked the opponent's bishop and gained time, but moreover, we trapped the opponent's bishop. Look at this situation. The bishop has a whole bunch of squares it could go to. However, any and all of them would move the bishop to another square where one of the white pieces would capture it. From Black's perspective, in such a situation, you would want to do damage control, which means you'd rather lose your bishop for an opponent's pawn than losing it for nothing and letting your opponent just capture your bishop for free. So, in practice, that would mean, in this position, the bishop moving to e3, at least to get a pawn for the unavoidable loss of bishop. Now that we understand the situation, of course now the pawn or the king could capture the bishop, and White would have won a bishop for a pawn. So now let's see some very similar situations, but there will be some significant differences. Here we are. In this situation, it looks like practically the same position. But this and the upcoming several examples will demonstrate to you how little or seemingly unimportant differences in a position can mean a major difference. Well, obviously the question is, what if in this position White makes the same plan in trying to trap Black's bishop? By playing rook b7, again we move the rook away from the attack and attack the opponent bishop, and the bishop, just like in the previous example, has no place to go. However, because the white king is in a different position than where it was in our first example, it enables black to escape. The bishop that seems to be trapped will escape. The way black can accomplish that is by gaining a tempo. I guess that sounds familiar, right? Gaining a tempo, as we said, typically happens when we attack an enemy piece while we are accomplishing a defending goal. So in this case, our goal is to save the bishop, to find a safe square for our bishop that's on b6. One of the problems that the bishop has is that the rook on d8 takes away a potential safe escape square from the bishop. And because the white king right now is on an open file, enabling the black rook to give an intermediate check, or gain a tempo, in other words, keeping the white king busy from getting out of the check without giving white the time to capture the black bishop, and when white moves the king, for example, to e2, that's exactly when the black bishop now is free to run away to d8 and maintain the material advantage that black already had. So we can see clearly that in chess those little differences can be humongous difference and changing the complete evaluation of the situation. I'm not saying that it is the case in every single time. In some cases, if a king is one square over from another, may not mean much. However, there are many situations, maybe, I don't know, at least half of the situations, when every little difference, just being one square over, can result in opposite evaluation. Let's see a couple more on this very topic. Let's see this position. Again, all the pieces are on the exactly same squares except for the white king. The white king this time is on h2. And that again gives black an escape opportunity, but in a totally different way. It's quite surprising and actually quite beautiful. So again, the key question is, why can't white just trap the black bishop by playing rook b7 and attacking the bishop? This time, the black rook does not have a way to gain a tempo and give an intermediate check to free up the d8 square, so black needs to think about something completely different. And this involves a very important tactic, namely a fork. In order to figure this one out, you need to use your imagination a little bit. And now that the white king is on a dark square, on a diagonal of dark squares, because of that, black now has the opportunity to play rook to b8. Wow, this protects the bishop. But at the same time, puts the rook on an unprotected square. Isn't it even worse to lose a rook than a bishop? Well, that is very true. It's very bad to lose a rook compared to a bishop. However, not if we have a clear way we can calculate that in the very near future we will gain the opponent's rook as well. So the point is, if now rook captures rook, the black bishop will simply move to c7, give a check. This is a fork. The white king needs to get out of the check, or the check could be blocked, of course, also. It doesn't matter. In either case, the point is that white was busy answering the check and giving black the time to now just capture white's rook. And all what happened in this scenario, the rooks got traded. Both rooks disappeared, not just one or the other. So what we saw again in this situation was the white could try to trap the bishop but wouldn't be quite successful. And let's see the next example, still on the same theme. Again, everything is the same except the white king is in a new location on h1. And this is an unfortunate one as well. Again, if the white rook tries to trap the black bishop by playing rook b7, black can escape. And again, it's by the method of gaining a tempo, gaining time, by giving an intermediate check. The way that works this time, not from the G file, but from the first rank. The rook comes down, checking the white king. When the king moves out of the check, again the black bishop is free to escape. Let's move on to another example of a totally different situation. Right now, if you look at the position, we can see that the black rook on h6 can hardly move. The only legal move it would have is to move to h5, which of course is covered by the white pawn on g4. Well, that's all great and beautiful, but why would the black rook move there? Well, it would not unless it would be in danger where it is right now. The good news is, from white's perspective, that white has a dark squared bishop which has the opportunity to attack black's rook that's on h6. Of course, time is the essence right now, because if black would get the time, black would move his knight right away from g6, opening up plenty of squares for the black rook along the 6th rank. So white needs to hurry up. Attacking the rook with the pawn with g5 would be unfortunate, because then no longer is the h5 square guarded by the white pawn, and then it is indeed safe for black's rook to go to h5. So that would be a mistake. So now we know that the rook on h6 needs to be attacked by the white bishop. Now, the difficulty is, the challenge is, to figure out from where, because white has two options: either attack the rook from d2 or attack it from g7. At first it seems that both accomplish exactly the same: attack the rook and then capture it, or if the rook moves away to h5, then the pawn would capture it. Well, in chess, first appearances often can be deceiving, just like in life. So it's important to always try to pretend what you would do if you would be the other side. So look always for the best response of the opponent as well, not just your own best moves. Only so you can make objectively correct decisions. Well, let's start with the wrong choice. That is moving the bishop to d2. The problem now is that black can interpose the attack and put the knight on f4. While it seems that that's losing a knight, it's not quite the case. First of all, even if it would be the case, it would mean that the black rook would be free to run away along the 6th rank and be ahead in material. However, the story is even worse for white in this case, because the black rook won't just move to a random square, but will pin white's bishop right away by moving the rook to f6, attacking it, and as the white king is too far away from the black squared bishop, it cannot move next to it to protect it. So therefore the white bishop on f4 will be lost. Okay, so let's see what is the correct choice right now, and that is moving the bishop to g7. Now indeed the black rook will be lost, and with correct play the game should end in a draw. Let's move on to our next example. Here we are. A very different story, different type of pieces on the board. At first, one would think that white is the one in a clear lead in the position, still having his own queen. Although black has a rook and a bishop as compensation, which even in material numbers almost equal a queen. 5 plus 3 is 8 versus the queen, which is 9. However, here the main problem for white is that it is black's turn. If white could make a move, white wouldn't have a problem to at least draw the game, moving the queen out of the corner and activate it. The problem is, hence it's black's turn, white does not have the time to do so. And if black finds the correct move, white needs to kiss goodbye to the queen. Can you figure out what that powerful move is? Well, hopefully you got it right, and the move is rook coming down to b1, simply attacking the queen in the corner. And what's important about this situation is that the black bishop is protecting the rook. So the best that white can do is indeed capture that very rook, but then the bishop will still capture the queen, giving black a winning advantage. Black is now a bishop ahead, while still maintaining a passed pawn on the d-file. Remember, if black would not have a passed pawn or a pawn on the board, a bishop in itself is not sufficient material advantage to win the game. However, if it comes with one or more pawns on the board, a bishop advantage is almost always a guaranteed win. Let's move on to our next example. Here we are. In this position, it seems rather equal or close to draw with even materials on the board. If indeed it would be white's turn, there is no doubt that with correct play, the game should end in a tie, in a draw. But in our case, it is black's turn. And the point is that the white knight is very unfortunately positioned. So what black needs to try to do is attack that knight while that temporary unfortunate position exists. Because if, for example, white would move the rook, for example, to d1, clearing a safe and comfortable square for the knight on f1, white would be just fine. Problem is, black can and should attack right now that very knight on g3. However, it's not the same which pawn does the job. If right now the f pawn would advance to f4, the white knight would get an escape square, a beautiful square at that, in the center of the board on e4. So that would be a wrong choice. The correct choice is to advance the h-pawn. As we can see right now, anywhere that knight from g3 would jump to, it would be captured by one of the black pawns. The only other thing white can try to do is to play f4 and counterattack. And this is a tricky move. because if black is careless and moves the knight to some random square, for example c6, then white could gain a tempo by moving his bishop from e2 to c4, checking black's king, and when the king moves away, the knight would succeed to escape. So, going back to the beginning, after h4 and white counterattacks with f4, it's very important where the knight goes, and the correct square is to go to f7. So now the diagonal a2 through g8 is closed up. White does not have an opportunity to give a check with the bishop, and therefore white is hopeless, the knight is lost. Let's see another similar situation. Here we are. Here the situation is a bit different because black only has one choice to attack the white knight. However, as we shall see, even that is not sufficient to trap the knight. When now black plays f5 to f4, attacking the knight on g3, the e4 square, unlike in the previous example, is guarded by black's knight, so it would be an unsafe square to go to. I suggest, when a piece of yours is attacked, first of all, see if maybe you can checkmate your opponent and ignore the attack, or you can capture a valuable piece. However, assuming that none of those are at your disposal, the next thing you would look at, okay, I'm being attacked, is there a safe square I can simply run away to? And if that fails as well, then you would look for a creative way of finding a safe square to move to, maybe a move later. Just like in this case, that is the solution by moving the bishop to c4, the same idea what we saw earlier as well. Check, very important, not giving black the time to capture the knight on g3, and when the king moves away, doesn't matter where, then the e2 square has been freed up and white is just fine. Let's see the next example. Here we go. Again, a totally different story. We're in a knight and bishop endgame where actually white is a pawn up. Generally speaking, being a pawn up in an endgame is a winning advantage in many cases. However, here, in this case, it's not the story at all, because black, finding the correct move, will immediately reverse the material balance to their own side. The white knight will be trapped. Remember, that's the topic of our lesson today, the trapping of various pieces. The way black can trap the knight is simply move the king to e6, and now you can see that anywhere that knight would try to escape, it would be captured. It's important to point out that it's the only correct solution, because if the king would move to d6, for example, then the knight would escape on f7. Or, if the king would move from the other side, then the knight again escapes on d7. So the only correct solution was going right to the middle with king e6. And let's see one more final example in this lesson. Here we go. In this position, we have a rook and knight versus rook and bishop endgame with even number of pawns. So typically, this would be likely to end in a draw, although black has a bit superior pawn arrangement in that black has a passed pawn on the h file that could run. However, it's pretty far from the promotion square, and obviously it would be stabbed easily before it would get promoted. On the other hand, what's really important right now is the unfortunate positioning of white's rook. And here the key is to attack that rook as soon as possible. And after d5, indeed, the rook does not have a real safe square to go to. Again, accuracy is rather important. It would be a huge mistake to first give a check, hoping that the king would move and then to trap the rook, because instead of moving the king, the rook would block the check, and then that opportunity would be gone forever. Well, I hope you got a little better idea of trapping pieces or escape from being trapped, and you can use those ideas in your own games. Thank you for listening. So long until next time. Bye-bye.